All right, well, we will get started. Welcome, everyone. I am Megan Gieseker from ALA's Public Programs Office. I'm pleased to introduce today's webinar, Media Literacy Education for Adult Audiences, Exploring ChatGPT and Conversational AI. Next slide, please. Before we start, I'd like to make a few quick announcements. Today's webinar is a presentation of ALA's Public Programs Office and is the last session in our Media Literacy Education for Adult Audiences, Architecture of the Internet webinar series. This webinar series focuses on topics included in the recently published programming guide, which we will put into the chat for you. This project was made possible by a grant from the U.S. Institute of Museum and Library Services. The views, findings, conclusions, or recommendations expressed in this webinar do not necessarily represent those of the Institute of Museum and Library Services. Hopefully, many of you are familiar with Programming Librarian, a website of ALA's Public Programs Office. We have a lot of program ideas and an online learning library full of free webinars like this one. Next slide, please. A couple of notes about our virtual classroom. Only the presenters have microphone access. Live captions can be enabled by clicking on Show Captions. Please use the chat feature to engage with your peers, to ask questions of the presenters or ALA staff, or if you are experiencing any technical issues, please use the Q&A window. Next slide, please. We are asking for volunteers to participate in one-on-one virtual conversations with our partner on this project, Knology, a nonprofit research organization who is helping us with evaluation. These half-hour conversations will focus on what you have learned during the webinar series. You do not need to have attended all of the sessions to participate. Even just attending this session counts. If you are interested, please fill out the brief Google form that we put in the chat for you. The link is also on the screen here. Your participation helps us to continue our work on this important topic. Next slide, please. Now I would like to introduce our speakers for this afternoon. Michael A. Spikes, PhD, has been teaching, writing about, and developing curriculum on the subject of news media literacy and media production for more than 15 years. Currently, he is the director of the Teach for Chicago Journalism Project and a lecturer at Northwestern University's Medill School of Journalism. He is also the co-founder of the Illinois Media Literacy Coalition, a collaborative of Illinois educators and scholars working to improve and build models for media literacy education in public schools. The coalition's framework for media literacy education has been recognized by the Illinois State Board of Education as a key resource for teachers. Michael has previously held roles as a project manager for the Center for News Literacy at Stony Brook University, a media studies teacher in both public and charter schools in Washington, D.C., and was a member of the educational advisory team at the Newseum. He has also held roles as a media producer and editor for NPR, the PBS NewsHour, and the Kellogg School of Management. Kristen Calvert serves as the Central Library and Events Administrator for Dallas Public Library. She oversees event and program initiatives for the library system, along with managing the J. Eric Johnson Central Library. She has worked in multiple facets of public library service over the past 10 years, from circulation and librarian to manager and administrator in both rural and urban libraries. She has worked as a media literacy stakeholder with ALA and trained library workers in media literacy principles. Originally from Florida, she received her master's in library science from Florida State University and her bachelor's from the University of Florida. And with that, I'd like to turn things over to Michael and Kristen.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Mike Spikes, as you heard a little bit about from the Medill School of Journalism. And I and my colleague Kristen are here to talk to you today about understanding conversational AI. We're going to talk about some background of it. If you've been in some of the other webinars that have been part of this series, you may hear some things that may be repeated, particularly in terms of like understanding the technologies around what we're talking about, but we think it's good to sort of start with that sort of laying the baseline out. We're also going to be talking about some ways and giving you some tips on how to use some of these tools. In particular, when we talk about conversational AI, we're talking about tools like ChatGPT. One of the things that I'm hoping to do and sort of like setting the table here is trying to take away the sort of mysticism around tools like ChatGPT. And really trying to emphasize, at least from my experience, again, coming from this sort of media literacy sort of like lens, thinking about generative AI and tools like ChatGPT. I'm going to try to keep myself to not talking about it in so many different terms, but thinking about them as like a tool that can really be helpful to you, but also knowing that there are limits to the uses of them. So that's going to be really my sort of goal here. Also, and then I'm going to hand it over to Kristen to talk about uses of these tools in the library space, and particularly in the programming space. And she's going to give you some tips, tools, and some examples of how she uses them in her role within the Dallas Public Library. Uh, yeah, so let's go ahead and get started. And then we're going to have some time for question and answers toward the end. We definitely want to have this be an interactive session for folks. So keep that chat window up as we go. Feel free to put questions in the Q&A. And also, when we prompt you to do so, maybe give some responses to things in the chat. All right, so we're going to start with sort of talking about like what is this thing we are discussing today when we talk about conversational AI. So, like I mentioned, my part of this presentation is going to focus on some of the basics of what AI and conversational AI like ChatGPT is. Because despite what we've heard from many different peoples, particularly within media outlets, ChatGPT and other conversational AI tools are not the only AI out there. A lot of times when we hear the term AI, we just think about ChatGPT. But I want to sort of emphasize here in my part of the presentation that that's not the case. I think a better way to think about all of these tools, especially when we start talking about conversational AI and I would say AI in general, is to think of them as almost like a nested set of technologies with AI or artificial intelligence being at the top. And it sort of encompasses, when we get all the way down to Chat GPT in particular, it sort of encompasses a wide range of technologies that have been developed over time, such as technologies like machine learning, generative AI, large language models, also known as LLMs, all the way down to the product of Chat GPT. So if we start off with artificial intelligence or AI, AI is made up of a number of technologies, like I was just talking about, and if possible, shouldn't be equated with a tool like ChatGPT. Also, remember that. It again references a collection of technologies that both process data and produce outcomes that mimic human intelligence. So when we talk about that mimicking, it does things like it makes discoveries, it draws inferences, and it also reasons, just like humans do when based on any incoming data to it. So in particular, like when we think about something like ChatGPT, we give it a prompt, we ask it a question, it gives us a response that very much mimics a response that we might think to get from, say, a human that we might ask. So, in terms of examples, how many of you might have one of these at home? A smart speaker such as like Amazon's Alexa or Google or the Google Home speaker. And what do you usually do to it? You ask it questions, right? And it gives you answers most of the time. I know in my own home, I use a number of these speakers, and I have to admit that I very much limit it to basically telling me what is the weather and set the timer, right? Because it seems like those are the two things that it can do really, really well. When it comes to other stuff, you get those responses like, I don't know, but here's a search, right? Just like you might do on, say, Siri or Google. I'm trying to think of the Google tool like in Android because I have a iPhone, so I usually think of Siri. But I think of the number of times I try to tell Siri to do something and it says, "Oh, I don't know, but here's a Google search." Right? While yes, it can give you answers, but it's very limited. Another example of artificial intelligence tools that we might use as well is something like Google Lens that does visual searches to find out things like what this plant is or what is this building, on things like that. This also uses artificial intelligence to do its work in a couple of different iterations. Now, in most cases, just like I was talking about in that example with the Google Home speaker, the certain AI tools use very specific instructions and are programmed with certain instructions to do only certain tasks. So yeah, like people are saying, they yell at Siri for misunderstanding me, and as people can be wary of these sort of tools, right? But some of the things that sort of limit, I think, tools like the Alexa and the Google Home speaker is that they are really programmed to only do certain things. So, such as in the case of the smart speaker, it has a very specific set of directions that help it to do its work. So it's somewhat limited. Okay. So next, to sort of advance these tools, we then get into the use of machine learning, which is another type of AI that uses algorithms, so again, programmed rules, to not only just answer questions, but also learn from its incoming data and perform tasks without these explicit directions. So examples that we have around us of machine learning AI include development of, say, personalized search engine features that use data like your location to prioritize results that highlight things that are near you. So in particular, if you search for bike on Google, Google will show you, give you results that show bike stores that are near you. It also may use data on what you have searched for in the past, which I'm sure you've heard some people talk about in the past. I know my colleague Anna, trying to think of how to say her last name, but from the University of Illinois here in Chicago, probably talked about the attention economy and how that works. But tools like machine learning will use this sort of personalized data, Google searches, things like that, to then drive its own recommendation engine to sort of improve its results. At its best case, that's what it is meant to be used for. And again, think about this as tools, these AIs, as learning and responding from what you have given it. Now, in these cases, it does this because it would be impossible to write specific directions and hard code all these rules into a search engine that's very personalized for every person that uses it. There are billions and billions of people that do so. So next we have generative AI. And generative AI is a type of AI that uses complex machine learning techniques to generate new and complex outputs based on a set of training data. Now, this training data can include things like images, text, and video, from which the computers, or I should say, really a bank of computers, learns from and identifies patterns within that data that it can then use to create these complex outputs. These patterns that it learns are then developed into what is known as a model. And then that model again is used to generate a particular type of output. So understand generative AI. This is where we're getting closer and closer because you probably have heard this. Generative AI is we're getting closer to something like ChatGPT, uses a set of training data that then trains a model, which is then used to create its outputs. These models are based upon, and the one we're going to talk about most today is based upon what is known as a large language model, or LLM. Now, what this contains is, again, a large library of text material, which can include books, articles, web pages, and lots of conversations that people have had online that have been used again to discover patterns and rules of language. Now, this model is then used to drive a transformer, which in its simplest description breaks down the textual patterns into what are known as tokens. And those tokens are used to generate strings of text by predicting the relationships between words, in turn creating human-like responses to prompts. Probably a good way to think about this is sort of like the autocorrect tool that works on your phone. That tool has a dictionary. You can also think about that dictionary as like the large language model, which then tries to predict words that might either you might be trying to type, say in a text, or other product that you're typing into your phone or on your computer. But in this case, it's used to create these strings of text that create these sort of human like responses to prompts. This is largely the same process that's used for creating images and also video generation. Again, these are the computers identify sort of patterns that are in, say, images that are fed to it that feed its model, and then it uses those to generate new images. Just like the image you see here on this slide, this is actually an AI generated image that was created from a prompt. Now, fun fact, the most popular generative AI tool, ChatGPT, that you'll hear me mention many times, is named partly for its transformer, which is known as a generative pre-trained transformer. That's where GPT comes from. So now when we look at all of these tools together, again, think of them as being very nested within one another. So think of almost like ChatGPT as a product of a large language model, of which is a part of generative AI, which in turn is a part of machine learning, which then all together would be parts of artificial intelligence or AI. This is just a piece of AI. I also wanted to highlight that along with ChatGPT, there are other tools out here that do the same sort of things that include Google Gemini, Microsoft Copilot, and others that you may have heard of. When we're talking about these conversational AIs, these are the same types of tools that we are talking about. Now, however, as amazing as these tools are and have been, there's been a lot of worry about how these tools are used and what their effects may be on society. With companies like OpenAI, the creator of ChatGPT, creating their large language models based off of copywritten material without permission. And in other cases, people have worried about using generative AI tools to create work that they then pass off of their own. So, in particular, in the research arena, we've had lots of conversations. I know I've had lots of conversations with colleagues of mine who have been somewhat hesitant and even will push back on the use of generative AI tools as part of doing research. Now, I think as time goes on, I think people are becoming a little bit more open to that. But also, we have the issue within classrooms where teachers have been getting really worried that students will use generative AI tools to just create products that, again, they'll just pass off of their own. And also, we've had this somewhat of a panic with the creation of what is known as synthetic media, like this picture of the Pope in a puffer coat that looks very photorealistic, but was generated by a generative AI tool, and the strange but proliferating image of the shrimp Jesus out of these same kind of tools. Now, in just a few days ago, OpenAI, again the creator of ChatGPT, made its tool for synthetic video creation known as Sora available widely to all paid users of the service, which allows for the creation of, again, photorealistic but synthetically created video. And in my area of media literacy and also within journalism, there have been many conversations about what the implications of that may be. And I'm sure, we'll take questions on that and we'll have a little bit of a conversation about that at the end. But they're like again, so we've had this sort of stigma around this sort of like new tools, and I want to really briefly invite my colleague Kristen to come in to talk a little bit about what have been some of the stigmas that she has seen in the library space when talking about the use of generative AI or these conversational AI tools.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, I was actually talking to one of my colleagues about this earlier today and about about what that kind of looked like for us. But one thing I was thinking about is um, we did an event posting for this really big event we were having, and there was a typo in the bottom of it, which it was a human-made poster, human-made error. on the poster. And a lot of people were really upset about the typo, which makes sense for the library. You know, we're not supposed to have typos. I'm sure a lot of you have been there though. And when people were commenting, there were some uh, like comments that assumed it was AI and the library shouldn't be using AI to do this, and that sort of took off. And I just thought it was really interesting that we jumped to that to the first place, and also that that's kind of how the response was, that like it kind of built off of those comments, and it doesn't make you feel good, you know. It doesn't make you want to use it either. So yeah, it's definitely a tricky area.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. So I think something that Kristen highlights here is I think we run into issues where we see generative AI tools, again, like ChatGPT, just to be used in substitution, say, for things that we would have usually had humans do, right? So I think a good way, and a way that I would like to sort of reframe the use of these tool of, you heard me use this word already, use it, these tools, is to actually think about them as a tool that can help you get things done, not just do the thing for you. So a good analogy I like to use is thinking about like putting together a piece of furniture, right? Like I'm sure many of us have gone to IKEA. I love me some IKEA. But you go to IKEA, you pick up you pick out the thing you want, you go to the big warehouse and it's in a box and it's usually all in pieces, you got to put it together, right? So you need tools to do that, right? So what tools might be available to you to put this thing together? Usually within the box, it's the lowly Allen wrench, right? They usually give you one of these to put it together with. But while yes, it's a tool that can get the job done, you may have other tools that can help you to get it done quicker. So if you look at the top of the instructions that are on this bookcase, they suggest that you use screwdrivers, a pencil, and a hammer to get them done. They're good suggestions, but you might also find it helpful to use other tools. What other tools might you think might also be helpful to use to put this together? Type your responses in the chat. Just give us a couple of ideas of other tools you think that might be more helpful to help you get the task of getting this bookcase put together faster. So I'm seeing screwdrivers, I see YouTube, drills, a friend, videos. Okay, TaskRabbit, yeah, get another person to do it. Other Allen wrenches, okay, impact hammer, and so on. So yeah, like many of you, I would also think like something like a power drill or power driver would allow you to get this done much faster, right? But I'm sure when these tools were in their infancy, people thought like, oh, why would you use something like that? Like it would, yes, it could get the job done faster, but it thinks it takes away some of the efforts, right? So that could be a good way to think about the uses of generative AI, right? It's a tool. It's not going to be able to do everything. You as a human is going to need to interact with that tool, but it can help you get it done faster. So here's one example of like how I use generative AI as a tool to help me get tasks done. So in many cases, I'll write, articles and may need help with trying to think about titles for that article. So in this case, like I say, I write an article and I need to brainstorm a title. So I go to a generative AI tool like ChatGPT and I'll describe the article and I prompt it to then draft me some potential title ideas. Then it would output to me 8 different choices. And I'll say, okay, well, next I'll look at those choices. I'll revise them myself to make sure that they align with what the goals of that piece was. And I'll choose 3 that I like. Then from those 3, I may go back to the tool, put the 3 in, and then prompt it to say, give me some other revisions. It will output for me one choice from those 3, and then I'll take that one, review it, and revise it, and then add it to my piece. So again, I have not gone to the tool to just give me a title and I just use that. But instead, I've used it as sort of like an iterative tool to help me get tasks done. In the same way I might ask a colleague of mine to help me to do so. But also, it's good to think about the uses of these tools, again, like it can be like an assistant, but also know that while it can be useful, it can be a very unreliable and error prone assistant. So in particular, that thing that I just showed you with that example with the sort of flow chart, I actually tried to go to a generative AI tool to actually to help me put together that chart, right? So here was my prompt. I made sure it was like it was detailed. I said I'm creating a presentation to show how I might use this task for my slide. Create a flow chart diagram, and then I wrote out all the things I wanted it to put in the flow chart, right? So then when I gave it to it, this is what I got back. And if you take a close look at it, it doesn't seem to know how the word title is spelled in particular. And it also created somewhat of a flow chart that just seems to be overly complicated, right? I told it I only needed 7 steps. You see one, I don't see a two, I see a three, I see an eight, I see a nine. And those were not things that I was looking for, right? So you go, that might give me some ideas, but I can't use that. And then I went to ChatGPT. It has a generative sort of image tool. And when I asked it to do the same thing, it gave me an even worse result. Where again, like I gave it the prompt, I asked it to do the thing, and then it gives me something where the words are misspelled. Again, it's overly complicated and it's much less than what I needed. So actually, what that told me was I should just make it myself. So I just made the chart myself. So again, as you see, I may have been able to get to the result that I wanted by maybe going back and forth with it, even though there are some limits, especially on creating images with it. But again, I would not take this and just throw it on a slide and just say I'm just going to describe things around it. So again, I use this to emphasize that that these generative AI tools that we want to use them as that a tool that can yes help us get work done faster, but we should be very hesitant to just take the products that come out of them as just just sort of a given and just put those up. So with that said, I am going to now pass things off to my colleague Kristen to talk about the use of these tools within the library context.
Okay, thank you. Um, really enjoyed that explanation, especially that last flow chart always makes me laugh. So yeah, my name's Kristen Calvert. I am the Central Library and Events Administrator for Dallas Public Library. And so thinking a lot about how this we can use AI to benefit us, but also teach our community about the challenges that Michael did a great job of just demonstrating some of them. So we're going to go over a couple things in a little more detail. We'll talk about learning and this experience that you guys are actually having right now and how we can do that and help our colleagues do that. And then we're going to go through some program ideas as well. And I want to talk a little bit about one-on-one interactions before we move on from here. So you guys are going to have reference desk interactions where people either ask you questions directly about AI or they're questions that you have to find a way, like people are going to want to use AI for something and you need to help them maybe use it in the best way possible or steer them away from using it in that situation. We have found that experience specifically with job seekers here. We do a lot of one-on-one help sessions for folks who are trying to find a job, and people just want to paste all of their information into ChatGPT and ask it to make a resume for them, and that doesn't work. So, that develops an opportunity where we can give people the tools they need. And talked a lot about in past experiences with media literacy and that type of thing when people ask you questions about politics or something like that at the reference desk. And that is going to more and more often when we get in that space come back to AI these days, because we need to help people understand how to see if something is generated through ChatGPT or through another tool, or if it's legitimate, and how to check for those things. So moving on to the next slide. The first step, which you guys are all doing right now, is to be able to teach people these skills and talk about them. You have to learn them yourself. And there's a lot going on right now that you can take these opportunities. Webinars and other training guides are available. I'm going to give you some recommendations on some of those things in just a moment. But another really important thing that you need to do is something like what Michael was demonstrating he did, which is kind of use the tools for practice yourself to really see what they're capable of and not capable of. And even if you're just doing that in a way, like maybe it's creating something for your library or even you personally, just so you can kind of see the limitations and it will help you better explain how to use those tools to others. And then also, you need to make sure that you are looking at what your organizational rules when it comes to using AI is. Public Library is a department of the city of Dallas, and that means we are beholding to their rules and need to follow those as well. And that that becomes a challenge with AI because they have some rules that make it hard to use. We talked a little bit earlier about kind of the shame with using AI and how people sort of frown upon that right now. So our rule is that if you use AI in any way, shape, or form, like if I'm using it to create an event description or or even for an idea for a title for an event. And even if I'm using it in the way that Michael talked about, where I'm sort of brainstorming with AI, and I'm like, give me ideas for this. And then it gives me some, and I'm like, okay, here's 3 titles. Can you workshop that a little bit for me? And going through that with it. Anytime we use it, even in that respect, or if I'm like, can you give me an idea for a flyer for this program, just so I can maybe see a visual layout and then I can sort of take it from there. Then we have to put a disclaimer on that says we use AI for it. And that it's hard because it automatically makes you think like, how is this going to impact me, or how are people going to view us as the library for using AI in that space? But it can also make your work a little bit easier. So just make sure that you guys are looking at what those rules are for your organization or entities that support you before using those tools, and that you're careful about how you're using them moving forward. And next slide. Okay, so some ideas of how you can learn more about AI. These are some resources that are available here, and Megan also added them to the webinar page for you. So the generative AI short course is a really great option. It was created by the Network of National Library of Medicine. So it leans towards health information, but it's applicable for other types of libraries as well. It's got multiple readings and recordings, so it's like any asynchronous course that you can take for free. AI in libraries, this Web Junction webinar, it's a really great panel that was set up from a variety of backgrounds. It talks about enhancing services and fundamentals. This digital librarian AI resource list includes courses, articles, ideas on writing policies, and info on copyright as well as ethics. And then the Exploring AI with Critical Information Literacy is an ACRL course. It's going to be offered January 2nd through February 21st of next year. And this one does have a cost tied to it, but it focuses on information and media literacy. It's good for public schools and academic librarian types. And I have some staff who are taking this to think about how we can better make AI as a part of curriculum. We're talking about computer classes and things like that, and really approach it from that way. And then the media literacy education for adult audiences, demystifying AI. It's a part of the series that we're doing now. And Dr. Brandy McNeil with New York Public Library has done a lot of really great work in this space. And that's a really great listen as well if you haven't gotten that far already. Next slide. And so moving into some program ideas, and these are things that in Dallas we are sort of just adding to our roster or trying to figure out how we can add them to our roster of programs, because we recognize that there is this need and we want to make sure that we are in some respect helping fill it. So I talked a little about what we said for job seekers already. We see people coming in the library and asking for that kind of help and wanting to use AI. And instead of telling them no, or that's not a good idea, we would rather help them use it as a tool because they're probably going to do it anyway than not. And for writing prompts was another really cool idea that came up. We have a retired English teacher on our staff at one of our branches, and she wanted to look at this as a way to highlight the pitfalls and some of the ethics of using AI through paper writing lens. And in the class, she's talking about hallucinations and how they can use that through the planning rather than the writing process to keep their writing their own, but solve some early stage assignment worries. So this is something that would apply specifically in like a classroom type setting, but could also, I think, have a wide range of audiences who are interested in that. And then computer classes, I've been saying for a long time that when we hand people the tools to use the internet, especially if they're doing that for the first time or just trying to get better at using the internet, then we really need to also give them the tools they need to understand how the internet works. And that's when we're coming back to media literacy and now AI as a part of that conversation. So, if you're teaching somebody to use Google for the first time, you really need to help them understand that now that AI response is at the top of your Google search, what does that mean? And should they be using it? How can they use it? How can they verify that the information is correct, etc. Again, if you're helping somebody use social media for the first time and they're creating content or sharing content that others have created, helping them understand the implications of understanding if something is an AI generated image or not, and that they don't want to share that misinformation or disinformation in that space. And then for researchers, we have this amazing genealogy department in our library, and we're going to teach a class to folks around our Dallas area about how Family Search is using AI to help researchers find records more easily. So I don't know a lot about this. I can't claim to be an expert on genealogy. Our genealogist would be pretty mad at me if I did. But it's a really great example of how we can kind of show people again how to use those tools that, like in this case, Family Search is already using, and how it can help help them do their research as well. Next slide. And then we have some really fun program ideas that we're doing. I am often of the mindset that people do not come to the things that we know that they need. Just like I was telling you guys about the job seekers, we also have people who, come in and have not used a computer before, and we know they need to take a computer class and that would really, really benefit them. But they're just not going to do it. And that really seems to be the case when we really start talking about like media literacy skills and stuff like that, because people like my dad is my favorite example of this, but he would be really mad if he knew I was using him as an example. So you guys don't tell him. So he is one of those people who will give me a fact. We'll be having a discussion about politics, and he'll give me something as if it's a fact, and then the information is not correct. And in my head, I'm like, that doesn't sound right, but I don't know it off the top of my head. So I have to like take the time to do the research and make sure it's right. And then I'll like explain to him why it's not. And almost every time that I look something up, it's like, that was shared in a Facebook post over and over and over again and has no factual base whatsoever. And it makes me like want to, face palm a little bit, because he really, really thinks he gets it. So he is the best example of somebody who like could really use a class on media literacy and understanding like how the internet works, and as an extension of that, AI now, and is just not ever going to sign up to take it because he is adamant that he reads both sides of the news. He understands how these things work. He gets it. So for that reason, I like to sneak skills into fun programs so maybe I can trick people into learning things. And that's something we try to do all the time at Dallas Public Library. It's something, yeah, we have had some great success in some of our programs. So um, something we've come up with that we're working on for next year is an AI food pairing program. I don't know if you're in a public library, or I don't know, any library setting. You probably know that like people love food as like a way to come to programs. In Dallas, we only let you have food in your program if you can make it a part of the program. It can't just be like a way to bribe people to come to it. So this is a great way for us to be able to do that. So the idea behind this program is if we have a variety of different foods and drinks and stuff like that, and we ask ChatGPT how we should pair these things together, it will give us answers. People can try the different foods in those pairings and discuss whether they think the pairing was good or not. There are also at this point, I know at least I've tried like an AI generated Coca-Cola and stuff like that. So I think if you can find those items in your market, bringing them into something like this would be really interesting as well. Because when I tried the AI generated Coca-Cola, I was not a fan. But somebody in our group was. So I think it just makes a really interesting discussion and helps give you an opportunity to teach these skills. AI Shakespeare is something we did a couple years ago. We have a Shakespeare themed Renaissance fair mini day that we do at the library like every summer. And so we decided to, as a part of this program, to help teach these skills, we would have people share their Shakespeare, like help AI write, I'm sorry, help ChatGPT write a play, essentially a Shakespearean play. So we would give it some of these characteristics and see what it came up with. And again, it was just this really entertaining kind of way to help people understand how it works and maybe get a little bit more comfortable with what it can provide as well as some of the limitations. Scavenger hunt is something we are working on for this next year. This is something we are trying to do in partnership with the Dallas Morning News, which is our local news outlet. And they wanted to do something with us to teach media literacy skills. We've had some success with like citywide type scavenger hunts in the past where they take you to local businesses and things like that. And it's sort of like a choose your own adventure game. So we're going to do that, but like work some media literacy skills that include facets of AI into it yet. There are brains much smarter than mine that are going to come up with these clues and think through them. So I can't give you more details than that right now. But once we have that, I will ask if there's a way we can share it forward, whether that's through Program Librarian or something like that. Because I think if it's successful, then it's something that could apply to a lot of other cities and library systems that could be potentially beneficial. And then creating your own newspaper is another thing that we've done in the past and this is like really before ChatGPT had taken off in the way that it has now. And this is where, again, to teach those media literacy skills, we had people come together and with a local news affiliate, and they were kind of just thinking through what would go into a newspaper, how to write headlines and stuff like that. And it helped strengthen the partnership between local media and folks who went to the program. It also created an actual newspaper that we gave out in the library for a while afterwards. It was just a really interesting experiment. But I think doing something like that, there are really some great ways that you could work in teaching those AI type skills about like how that works, how ChatGPT generates images, and we're thinking about headlines and stuff like that, how it can help, how it can hinder, and make that a part of that type of program as well. Before I move on, Michael, you have any comments or thoughts on programs and libraries or anything, else we need to think about?
What's interesting is that yeah, I've been doing some work with libraries for a while, but I got to say that my ideas are not as fun as yours. So I may leave it to the expert, but thank you.
Oh, sure. Um, and our next slide, please. So we've talked a lot about how to use these tools for the public and how to learn more about them. And I just want to take a minute to talk about ways that you guys can use these tools yourselves as well. We have used them. I've like played around with using it to come up with program descriptions. This is actually a really great idea if you are reviewing other people's program descriptions or anything like that too, so you can see what an AI generated program description looks like. Because I was like reviewing other folks' program descriptions recently at one of our branches, and I was like, oh, that is definitely straight AI. We got to fix that. So just even having an idea of what that looks like can be really helpful. And same with flyer ideas. I used this in my personal time once to like make a sign for a friend that I was going to hold up at a athletic competition he was doing, and I couldn't think of like something clever enough to put on the sign. So I was like, let me ask ChatGPT, and I used it just to like help my brain start kind of working. And then once I had the creative juice flowing, I came up with something myself. But it can be great to help you like maybe better understand how to position something on a flyer to make it engaging, or even what other people are doing with a flyer like that, because it's gonna like look at, other things that people have done to come up with ideas for you. And it also can help you with some really small details for like big intricate programs that you might be doing. So we had this Bridgerton ball last summer, and it was so much fun. It was like this huge hit, and people were really excited. And because of this grant that we have, we had to find a way to tie it to Shakespeare. So we were like, and the Bridgerton, the whole story idea does come back to like Shakespearean play. So we had what we needed on that level, but we had to like more obviously tie it all together. So what we did was do a Lady Whistledown paper that was about Shakespeare. So it was like basically a gossip column about Shakespeare. And that is not something that we could have been successful at writing on our own in any like length of time as what we had. And because we could use AI to like kind of start that piece of it, we were able to come up with this really beautiful like paper that was very in the style of Lady Whistledown and was a great asset to the program. And people were actually interested in reading and learning about Shakespeare in a meaningful way, where if we had written it, it probably would have been a lot drier and less interesting. So that was really helpful to be able to do, and something we couldn't have really accomplished without that tool. And I will say that just like every other sense, we had to read it and fact check it, look for spelling errors, etc., because it definitely was not something that was perfect. It really just gave us that way to get started and kind of to exist in a place we couldn't have existed otherwise. And of course, when you are using these for your own work, your own your library's gain, etc., remember to take training or provide that training to your staff who will be doing these things. Fact check, proofread. I know you that you will because you're library workers, and follow your employer's rules. That's a really tricky area. And also be ethical in your use. There are a lot of ethical concerns and challenges. You'll hear about them as you're taking different webinars and trainings in these series. You don't want to take somebody else's work, which reminds me, I forgot to mention at the beginning of my slides. I wasn't sure what images to use, and I was tired of like brains with clockwork ears and stuff like that. So I decided to look for Flickr AI generated images of cats. So that's what you were entertained with for the last few slides is AI cats. And that's kind of the end of what I have. Mike, do you have any comments or any other thoughts on how we can use the tools in libraries? Or I know you talked about that a lot already, but anything else before we start talking about through questions?
Yeah, I see some really interesting questions, so I'm really eager to jump in. But one thing I do want to note that you mentioned a little bit earlier in that description, for people that have had hesitancy, and I think this will also speak to the ethical issues around the use of generative AI tools, when it comes to passing off the content that comes from them as your own in terms of an ethical issue, I actually would argue that it becomes very helpful if you become used to the text that you get from them, because like some people have mentioned in the chat where some people have been able to identify when something comes from a generative AI tool because it's kind of not great. Like it's not a really great writer. Like the writing is very dry. It doesn't really have any feeling in it, and you can see it. I mean, just recently, and so just to make it really, really quick, I think when you have experience using the tools yourself and then you see the results and then you sort of revise it, I think it becomes easier for you to be able to identify when others are trying to pass off something that just came from the tool that they just copied and pasted from it. Because, like in particular, I know personally, I find that I go to it to work on things like on the media literacy side, right? And I see it uses certain words again and again and again, certain phrases again and again and again. And when I see them pop up in other people's things, like a really quick example would be I just went through a hiring process to bring on some undergraduate research assistants, and they wrote cover letters for the positions. And in some of them, I would see those same phrase, well, not just the phrases, but like the full sentence that I've seen come out of it. And it was pretty obvious that they just copied and pasted from the tool. So again, it says it's like really, really, I think it's really, really important to just understand like what comes out of them and really think of them as something that you should be forming, not just, copying and pasting from the tool. So I just wanted to mention that.
Great. Thank you both so much for this wonderful presentation. You're getting a lot of thanks in the chat already for sharing such helpful information and some great resources. There's tons of questions as well, so we will do our best to try and answer as many as possible in the time that we have left. So I want to just jump right into that. There has been a lot of talk and concern in the chat about the environmental costs of generative AI and the environmental impacts of AI. How can we reconcile that with responsible technology use? Any thoughts about that?
My thinking always has, at least so far, come back to the fact that no matter what, it exists and we need to help people understand how to use it. And I hate that, like, I guess in that environmental sense and the amount of energy it uses and all of that, like it it's harmful for sure. But if we are like, well, we're not going to be a part of that for that reason, then we're not giving folks the tools they need when they don't have those same concerns. And that overall is harming our society.
Yeah, I'm very much in agreement with that. I do think that it is unfortunate that we're seeing what some of those environmental, uses are with these sort of tools because you need so much power to run them. We are seeing some companies be a little bit more responsible. I think with trying, hopefully, what we'll see is more of them developing more clean energy tools to run, sort of like these models and things like that. But it is something that is here and it is not going away. So you may be limiting yourself a bit and not taking part in using the tools, but also at the same time, who knows? Maybe there'll be a movement to sort of like really get these companies to take up more clean energy, responses to actually run these.
Thank you both. Great points that you both raised there. Another big concern in the chat is about AI making certain jobs or certain programs become obsolete. So, for example, AI creating websites, would that mean that web designers or animators, writers, those jobs would end up becoming obsolete? Or programs like Illustrator, Photoshop, would those become obsolete with the use of AI?
Yeah, I hope you don't mind me jumping in really fast, Kristen, on this because I saw the question come up in the chat and I wanted to make sure we got to it. Um, personally, I think that what we're seeing, although these technologies are going to keep improving, I think what we see at the current moment is that I don't think that they are going to be able to replace human, sort of like labor and tools and things like that. I don't think because as we see, like the writing is not going to replace like people, although there are people selling AI generated books, I think they're going to be books that nobody's really going to want to read. Also, when you have AI generated, like I hear AI generated music and it drives me crazy. So because it just doesn't have the same qualities as the materials that do come from humans. I do think that we are going to have a period though where more and more people are probably going to consume that content and really not care, about the quality. But I think at some point there'll be a little bit of pushback to that. So I think at the moment I'm not of the thought that it will take away either jobs or remove the things that humans do. I think what it will do is it will just replace sort of like not great humans doing that work and really make us sort of demand that high quality.
Yeah, I agree with Michael on that. Again, I think it's a space we live in, and of course it's scary to think about those things. But you guys, that AI generated Coke was really bad. Like, and it might get better, that's always a fear. We've been afraid of like robots taking on our jobs and stuff like that for a long time. And it does kind of suck that it's like the creative stuff that it seems like it's gonna take on the role with versus the stuff we don't really want to do, like check our email. But it is something we just have to figure out how to use, and making it like that partner or the tool versus like the thing that we're reading, and we're going to have to kind of take it in stride and help people understand those things um, as well.
Thank you both for sharing your thoughts on that. The next question I have is a bit of a two-part question. Kristen, you talked a lot about how there are certain AI policies at Dallas Public Library. So the first part of the question is, would you recommend having in-house regulations and policy about AI use? And then the second, more specific part of that question is, what AI source do you use at Dallas Public Library? And when you specify on your resources what you use, how do you make that wording?
Um, I do think it's a good idea to have some kind of like thing that our standard we're holding ourselves to. Like, as much as it annoys me that I have to add this little disclaimer because I don't want it to make us feel less authentic, it does help hold us to the standard of not copying and pasting from an AI generated, site or whatever. The thing that I was talking about that I have tried is ChatGPT. I actually, I have it on my phone, like I have the app, and I was looking at some of the comments, and when I was making the sign, for instance, I was like, can you make me a sign for this? And it was like way too much. And then I was like, okay, how about we dial it back a little bit? It does feel like kind of like you're talking to a person almost. And it can be really helpful in those senses. And then we have specific wording that we have to use. I don't really remember what it is offhand, that like the city has given us, but it's something like an AI generative tool was used to create this in part or something like that.
Yeah, I think the use of policy, like developing and even working together to develop those policies, and also knowing that they should be flexible as well. I think is really, really good. But I do think that it's going to become more and more important for like responsible use of this sort of work, but also taking into account that yes, you may get that sort of pushback. So, as an example, in my context, I use ChatGPT and Microsoft Copilot to like revise assignments that I was giving in my intro to podcasting class last year. And I very specifically put at the bottom. Now, granted, well, yeah, I very specifically put at the bottom of all my assignments. When I did that, I put like a disclaimer that said I used a generative AI tool. However, I used it to brainstorm. I edited all of the pieces to make sure that it aligned with the goals for the class and things like that. And I also tried to encourage my students to do the same thing because we actually do have a disclaimer also in our syllabi, and our school has asked us to do this to tell students you need to be transparent about your use of it. Now, granted, I had one student out of my 18 students in the class who submitted feedback, tell me that they took my disclaimer as meaning I just copied and pasted from ChatGPT, and they thought they questioned my sort of like ability to teach the class because of that. But that was one out of the whole group. Although you do sort of harp on the one that didn't go well. But with that being said, I think we really do have to model like best practices within this because I think we're going to get more and more examples of people not being responsible about their uses of it, and I think we really have to sort of lead the way for people.
Thank you both for sharing that. That was really helpful. And actually, kind of piggybacking off the idea of responsible use of AI, um, someone else was asking, we know that people use technology for nefarious purposes. So how can we implement guardrails on AI without infringing on intellectual curiosity? Which is a loaded question.
Mm-mm.
I, I really feel like we need to have ways that can. I like the idea of watermarks on AI generated content specifically for video. Video watermarks, because I think now we haven't seen somebody had mentioned about the deep fakes, and yes, deep fakes are concerning, but I don't know if we've seen like the onslaught of them as much as we worried there would be. But I am definitely a person that is a proponent of the watermark on those generated content, so that at least people will be able to identify when, again, synthetic, that's the word I like to use, synthetic media is created and then shared. Because I think, unfortunately, we do have too many times in the platforms where we're getting lots of the information that helps us to sort of understand the world, that people just pass it by and they just take it up and don't really think about it. So, while, yes, one, that is a call for us to teach more of the tools so people will be able to know where to check to make sure that they know that a piece of content was credible. I think it's even more important for us to have things like, watermarks and other ways to be able to quickly identify if something was a piece of synthetic media or was created by a generative AI tool.
Yeah, I think that I agree with that for sure, and I think the watermarks make a lot of sense. It can be, I mean, just in a space without AI on the internet, it's really easy to too easy to kind of go in and take somebody else's work without crediting them and stuff like that. So, yeah.
All right, thank you both. Unfortunately, we are out of time for the rest of these great questions. If we could go to the final slide, please. I would like to take a moment to extend a huge thank you to you both. This was so helpful. The information presented and the resources that you shared, I think will be shared widely with everyone. So thank you so much for all of that. I also want to thank my colleague behind the scenes, Samantha Oakley, for her support on this webinar. I also want to thank the Institute for Museum and Library Services for making this work possible. The archived version of the session will be available to view online by next week. We want to encourage everyone to watch the rest of the sessions in this series if you have not done so already. The link on this screen can take you to those recordings, so we encourage you to check those out. And one final note, as you exit today, you will be prompted to take a brief survey. Please take a minute to fill it out. As a quick reminder, if you are interested in participating in a virtual conversation, please also fill out that short Google form, and we'll put it into the chat again for you. And thank you so much for everyone for joining us today and for the rest of the series too. We really appreciate it. Have a good rest of your day. Happy holidays.